You are live. You're watching Direct Line Live with Mark Onkefer and Jackie Saxton with our special guest, Dr. Shannon Wright.
Well, it's like I wasn't even doing the intro. No, it's fine. Hi, good evening, everybody. It's Wednesday night, and as our magical God voice Dwight said, it is Direct Line Live. My name is Jackie Saxton. I'm here with my co-host, Mark Unkefer, and we are pleased to be joined by our special guest tonight, Shannon Wright. Shannon, how are you doing?
I am well, thank you. And thank you for making time to have me on your show.
Of course. So obviously the two main topics we want to talk about tonight is what we learned from the campaign trail, what you learned from your mayor's race in Baltimore. I'm sure there's a ton to go into there. And then also your upcoming race for first vice chair for the Maryland GOP. So I'm going to let Mark start off.
Sure. Let's talk about, obviously you ran for mayor. It's a tough to run as a Republican in Baltimore. I think probably you're tired of hearing about Ted McKeldin, who was the last Republican to be mayor. But talk a little bit about what were the issues that you wanted to make, that you wanted to raise about what a Republican mayor would do.
So I thought it was really important that people got to understand the reality of a Republican and a conservative Republican, as opposed to the Democrat spin of what a conservative Republican is. And those are two very different things. So I wanted the people in the city to really get to see and understand that there, one, is a difference, and two, what that difference is. I wanted them to understand that as a conservative Republican, it did not mean I had a tail and horns hidden somewhere. It didn't mean any of those strange things. That the important thing was for them to understand that just like them, I have children that I want to know are safe. I have grandchildren I want to see grow up. I want to be able to not get taxed out of my home. I want to know that there are more people and companies moving into the city than moving out of the city, just like them. And the question becomes, how do we get there? Because the way we've been doing it clearly is not working.
So what were some of the proposals that you made for how to get to fix up the city?
Well, one of the things that we really focused on was education, because regardless of party affiliation, I've not yet met a parent that did not want a good education for their child. So education was really something that we tried to focus on. And then we broke down what some of the quote buzzwords and phrases were, why they had a negative connotation, what they really mean, and how it would be advantageous for them. And we found some things that were some common ground and that resonated. When you talk about expanding opportunities in education and giving parents options and choices in education, everybody automatically assumes, oh, you mean charter schools and you want to destroy the public school system. And I explained to folks that no, you got to do a few things. But if you, one, introduce academic savings accounts, two, expand voucher programs, and three, expand charter options, what you do is you give parents more options for their children to be able to, they know their children better than anybody else does. So they know the learning style of their child better and be able to get them an academic environment that actually fits for them. Then what happens is you decrease class size in the public schools. So you actually free up some of the teachers in the public schools to actually be able to teach and not have to do so many of the other things that they have to do with so many children in the classroom. As a part of that, we would lobby the state to be able to keep the difference in the city from the average private tuition of $10,000 and the roughly $17,000 that the state currently pays, and put some of that money into actually making sure that the buildings in Baltimore City, the schools, had heat when they needed heat, cooling when they needed cooling, no four-legged tailed furry critters running around and all those sorts of things. And once folks got to understand, we weren't trying to reinvent the wheel, just make it work better. And not destroy public education, but actually make public education better and expand options, they kind of got it. So any issue that we had, we just had to not change the definition of the meaning, but change the language to the room we were in.
So obviously one of the biggest hurdles of running in a city like Baltimore, as with many urban areas, is that they're just so staunchly Democrat. How did you guys try to overcome that for your campaign? How were you guys reaching out to voters? Was it more like door to door, knocking on doors, making phone calls? What was your strategy?
Well, COVID made the door to door kind of challenging in the city. Just, a little bit. We had to rethink a lot of things this election cycle. And it was kind of cool in a way, because it forced us to take the time to be able to think outside the box. Politics 101 is one thing, but we had to really move beyond that in order to be able to stay in the game. Republicans in Baltimore typically don't earn the kind of and raise the kind of money that the Democrats do. We don't have the name ID and the name recognition that the Democrats do. The machine is not built for Republicans to be able to make any advancements. So we have to say, okay, well, what part on the media front is a challenge? So how do we circumvent that and be able to get the earned media? Because with the earned media, it increases your fundraising. With the increase in fundraising and the earned media, then you can get paid media. So we had to really think about it in a way of, okay, if this is where we want to be before Election Day, this is where we are now. How do we get from here to make this a reality? So it was really a lot of strategic planning.
Yeah. So overall, if you are running again tomorrow, or if you could do it all again, knowing what you knew now, what would you do differently and what would you keep the same?
I would pretty much keep all of it the same, honestly. We accomplished a lot in this election cycle, and it really was not just me. My team, we worked together well. Earned media is never something, well, in a long time, is not something that Republicans have really had regularly. We had network coverage from all of the networks in the city. Some of them we actually even had regularly scheduled coverage in addition to breaking news and special issues. That's something that hasn't been seen from a Republican in a long time in the city. Our campaign, even with COVID, not being able to fundraise and have events the way we normally would, we raised over 6 figures, which also is something that hasn't been done for a city race, a strictly local city race, in a long, long time. So I wanted to be able to do some of those things, regardless to the outcome on Election Day. One, to prove that they could be done, and 2, to prove that I could do them. And by extension, if I could do them, then I could teach others how to do it. And that's an effort that we can duplicate all around the state. There's not one municipality with a race going on that doesn't either need media or money. So, mastering that and ways around how to get that as a Republican is something that we all need to know. So I wanted to make sure that I knew it could be done, but I wanted to make sure, and I needed other folks to see that it could be done.
We've talked about education. One of the other very polarizing issues, and even more so today in urban politics, has been public safety. And so can you comment a little bit about how that issue played into your race?
Well, we'd have to do a second segment for me to give you all the details on that one. But I will say that public safety in the city is obviously a key issue. We have hit the 6th straight year of over 300 homicides in the city. And those are the homicides. That's not the shootings. That's not the muggings. That's not carjackings. That's not 300 plus homicides alone. So obviously public safety is a big issue. And it's something that really needs to be tackled. We chose to use it as an opportunity to talk about the Second Amendment, never saying the words Second Amendment, but saying, don't you want to have the right to defend yourself? And really be able to talk about that, to really be able to talk about, everyone says that we're understaffed in the police department. Do you want to put yours and your family's safety on gambling whether or not those officers will be able to get to you before that bullet does? And having some real talk and some real conversation. I talked to a lot of mothers groups and I said, listen, like you, I want to know that when my kids come home and my grandkids come home at the end of the day, that they come back with all the parts and pieces that they left with. In the city, that's a gamble. So clearly what we're doing is not working. It's time to make a change. So someone asked me, and One person asked me one time, and my response ruffled folks up so much. Nobody asked me that question again. They said, well, if elected, what would you consider a good first year goal in the decrease in homicides? And I looked at them and I said, that is one of the stupidest questions I've been asked this entire election cycle. Thank you. And they looked at me like I had just slapped them. And I said, let me explain. Because you're asking me to quantify how many lives it's okay for us to lose in the city. So my answer to you is none. So then the only percentage that's acceptable in terms of homicides is 0. So let's talk about that. Nobody asked me that question again.
That's very, very powerful. And especially, you know, continuing on that topic with everything, COVID aside, everything that went on this year with racial injustice and what we were seeing on the streets. I know Baltimore was one of those cities, I think back in, June, all the months are blending together this year. You know, I think we definitely saw some of that rioting there. How did that affect your campaign, if at all?
Well, I mean, because the team did a really good job with earned media, every time something happened, the networks were calling for a statement. So the earned media was a double-edged sword at times. But in terms of the whole racial injustice thing, again, it was time for some real talk. And what I mean by that is this. A couple things have to happen differently. One, parents need to put the fear of God in their children so that they're more afraid of their parents when they come home if they act out other than how they've been raised when they are out. That's number one. And number two, our police need to stop being afraid of doing their jobs. And I understand why they are, because in this whole PC society, you know, things have gotten kind of askew. But it used to be that when you left your house, you knew you needed to behave because your teacher would say something to your parents, your neighbor would see you and say something, a whole bunch of folks. But we have changed so much as a society that is now the crime as opposed to the actual misdeed that the child did. So when folks ask me, well, what do you feel about the statues and specifically the statue issue? And I said, well, let me put it to you like this. That statue didn't hurt anybody. That statue didn't do a doggone thing to anybody. And knocking that statue down and putting it in the water where folks are going to spend money to go get it out of and restore it is not going to change what has happened. But what can change the future is how you react now. Nothing you destroy is going to change the injustices you feel you have had to deal with. The only thing that will change that, two things that will change that is one, register and vote. And two, actually put yourself in a position where you have the ability to positively affect the change that you say you want. Somebody asked me about Black Lives Matter. And I said, you know, as a Black person, you would think I'm in favor of Black Lives Matter. And as a Black person, I do believe Black Lives Matter and white lives matter and all kinds of colors of lives matter. But when you specifically talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, you might be able to get a little bit further with me understanding your movement if you had an end goal. What do you want? What are you trying to do? When you can't tell me what the goal is, then I got a problem with the whole process and plan. So again, it was one of those conversations that didn't happen too often. Because when I asked them, I said, okay, Black Lives Matter. Yes, all lives matter. Now that we've established that, what you want? And when you can't tell me what you want, then why should I pay attention to what you're doing? If this is actual constructive protests to correct a wrong, that is one thing. But even during the time when those marches were happening regularly, there was an end goal. There was legislation that folks drafted. There were different movements, different things, different tangible things that people wanted to see as a result. But when you're telling me you over here burning this down because somebody else did something else, what they got to do with the person you destroying their business? So until you can tell me what the goal is and what you're doing now does to further you along to getting to that goal, we got nothing to talk about.
You talked at the very beginning a little bit about economic development for Baltimore, bringing jobs to Baltimore.
Mhm.
And maybe it's my personal take, but it does seem that sometimes Baltimore, both politicians, but also the business community get fixated on sort of Taj Mahal projects, be it the keeping the Preakness at Pimlico, be it sort of various large convention center. I mean, variety of big infrastructure projects as sort of the savior for jobs, and a lot of times those that don't pan out. Building a city finance or a state financed hotel. I mean, there's a whole series of that. What was your take on how to kind of have a conversation about how to make Baltimore more competitive and to attract more jobs to the city?
Well, having that conversation was interesting because it gave me the opportunity to really talk about some of the federal programs that are already in place to do some of the things that need to be done for sensible and responsible development that the last several administrations have just failed to utilize properly. We don't need bigger budget items. We don't need to reinvent the wheel or a new wheel. We just need folks that understand how to read the manual for the wheel we already have. For example, when you look at the economic climate in Baltimore, when you look at how many folks live below the poverty level, when you look at all those things, and then you look at programs that come out of HUD, and under Dr. Carson, a lot of them have been really tweaked well. When you look at Section 3, which specifically gives incentives and breaks for folks to be able to start, folks in public housing, to be able to start their own businesses, being able to then circumvent some of the red tapes and issues once some of the folks that have gone away return home. Okay, being able to actually utilize that. When you look at opportunity zones, when you look at some of the different things that have already been put in place to make pockets where development makes sense in the city, to not use them, it really becomes a strictly partisan argument, which is cutting off your nose to spite your face. So if you want to complain that the city's not getting enough money, well, how much is the city earning? What is the city doing to cut the red tape so that the businesses here could actually not just survive, but thrive? And that by doing that, expand the tax base that the city would then be able to use for true infrastructure that does not require a constant and consistent handout to the state and the federal level.
So let's talk a little bit and shift gears into what comes next for you. So obviously for all the Central Committee people watching, they know that you are running for first vice chair, right, for the Maryland GOP.
I am.
What are some of the platforms that you're running on there? And this is great for me to know because I am not on any of these email lists since I'm not on a Central Committee, but I am obviously have a very big interest in what takes place for our state party. So I'd love to hear about your platform and what you're running on.
So I'm asking everyone that is a Central Committee member and has a vote to put your common sense where your vote is. If you are happy with the direction of the state party relative to other states in the country, then you need to vote one way. If you are not, then you need to vote another. But when you do that, know what it is you're voting for. Now, we've had a lot of issues and drama. I'm just going to call it drama this year at the local, the state, and the federal level. But I am one that most folks know I'm a straight shooter. So my thought is this, and what I'm telling people is this. This race, these races for state party officers should not be about popularity. They should not be about who's connected to who knows who wore the best suit, the nicest shoes, or any of those other things. But this race, for everyone that is going to cast a vote, your vote should only go to people that can give you a suitable definition of and a plan for three things. And those are 3 M's: money, messaging, and manpower. And if they can't define that and give you an active, actual plan on how to get there, then you really ought not be voting for them. Again, money, messaging, and manpower. Those are the 3 things that no matter what jurisdiction you're in, everybody needs in order to be successful in running a campaign, or if you're on a central committee, helping others with their campaign. And it really comes down to that. It's not about friends. It's not about what happy hour you're going to, who makes the best, whatever. It's about how do we get to where we need to be. And I try to remind folks that it even goes beyond that. It's not a numbers game of, can we get folks elected in the state party? And then can we, turn delegate seats and state senator seats? It's about that, but for a purpose. And the whole purpose of this, all of it, comes down to getting folks elected that will craft and enact policy that will actually make everybody's lives better. That's what it comes down to. And a lot of folks get into this for the wrong reason and they forget that part. But this whole thing boils down to people and how what we do can positively impact the lives of people. And then I let folks know, if you can't wrap your mind around it that way, think of it like this. The more we do to fix up our problem areas in the state, the less comes out of your pocket in taxes. So if you want to put yourself first, then you need to make sure you are voting for people that understand the correlation between policy and your pocket, and how to make sure that that policy keeps other folks' hands out of your pocket.
Now, one of the challenges for vice chairs, you were vice chair before.
Mm-hmm.
You were 4 years ago, 2 years ago, and then 4 years ago, elected 4 years ago and served 2 years. Mm-hmm. Is the role of the vice chairs are, I think it's fair to say, not well defined. Sometimes we do a better job. You and I both, you are currently a county chair, a city chair, and I was a county chair. At least in our bylaws in Montgomery County, we define what the first and the second vice chairs were supposed to do, and there was some effort to follow that. There's no such description for the first, second, and third vice chair in the state party. How do you see that working out, and how do you see working with, obviously you've got three candidates for chairman. How do you see your role with them? Does it change depending on who's elected, or how do you see you creating a role for yourself?
Well, I think that moving forward, if we want to move the state party forward, it is incumbent upon the next chairman, whomever it may be, to be able to define by action, not necessarily by bylaw amendment, what those roles should be. And everyone should have a role. I'm not the type of person that would run for office to get a title and then sit there and do nothing. That's just not me. So personally, what I bring to the table is the ability to fundraise. That's number one. Number two, the ability to understand policy and to be able to understand how we help some of our central committees that may not have a lot of money be able to make a lot of noise, so that they can start to do the things that we did in Baltimore City, such as start to garner earned media, and then be able to attract the interest of folks that would consider running for office, and then being able to train them, and so forth and so on. So my role, my goal, is to bring some of my lessons learned from my race in Baltimore to all of the central committees throughout the state. You can't show me one central committee that doesn't need a little bit of help either raising more money, a little bit of help with doing a better job with messaging, or a little bit of help with being able to marshal manpower.
So one of the major races, obviously, that's going to be taking place that the next or incoming MDGOP board will have to focus on is the governor's race in 2022, and obviously the primary that comes with that. So what would be your strategy for helping out? Obviously, money, messaging, manpower. But what specifically would you want to do and focus on for the governor's race if you're elected?
So if we want to win the state, if we want to retain the state house, then we have to shore up where numerically and statistically our weakest areas are. We all know where those areas are, and that's what we have to focus on. There's a great phrase, the tide lifts all ships, but I will tell you the boats with the holes are still going to sink. So we need to shore up our weakest areas. And I think, although that is a difficult and challenging task, and each area that is a difficult area may be difficult for different reasons. So I would hope to be a part of the team that specifically deals with our most challenging areas. Because I think that's where there needs to be some focus there so that we can move forward together collectively to retain control of the state house and to be able to hold on to the delegate and the state senator seats we have and gain more of both.
Now, how did the state party work with you in both your race and obviously your running mates in Baltimore? Did you get support from the state party?
Yes, honestly, yes. This election cycle, the candidates from Baltimore, myself included, got more support than I've ever seen from the state party across the board. There are a lot of folks that say Baltimore's a lost cause, and why would you spend resources there? And the reason why is very simple. Statistically, it has been proven by good candidate after good candidate that has not succeeded, that if you do not start to turn the tide and trim the gap in Baltimore County, in parts of Montgomery County, in parts of PG County, you will have an increasingly difficult, if not impossible, time of holding the state house or gaining seats.
This might be an awkward question to ask just because Mark is on the call. But if you could change one thing about the way that the state party currently does things, and I am still relatively new to being involved in local politics, so I really am curious. If you could change one thing or improve one thing about the way the state party currently does things, what would you do or change?
Wow. Messaging.
Yeah.
What we believe, what we stand on, the planks of our platform, we know are absolutely correct. But the way we deliver or disseminate or articulate, whichever those words you want to use, that platform is we fall short on that. So it's kind of like, I'll give you an example. In Baltimore City, if you say Second Amendment, you're a Republican and the eyes glaze over and nobody's going to hear anything else you say after that. But if you say you have the right to defend yourself, don't you think you deserve the right to feel safe in your own home? Different conversation. Relates back to the same Second Amendment, but it's the way you deliver it. And I think if there was one thing I would change, I would work on, I would correct, I would hope to be a part of the group that can move that in a different direction, is messaging.
Yeah, I mean, definitely is being a part of the Young Republicans. Part of what we're doing in a similar vein is how do we bring people in? How do we, really solidify our position as a big tent party and where everyone is welcome and included?
I think you add a really important insight that sometimes it's not. Sometimes people think, well, gee, in order to be more competitive in areas that Republicans have historically not been as competitive, somehow you have to change the message to be something else. And I think you've been very eloquent in describing sometimes what it is really taking the content and describing it differently and relating it in, or describing it in far more relatable terms. And I think that's a very important insight that you're really bringing into that, of issues that, let me pick on my friends in Carroll County, they would go for it, but you need to talk about it in different ways. Maybe talking about the same thing, but you're relating it in ways that are more accessible. I think that's a great insight.
So it's a matter of a sales term would be speaking to the room you're in. So
yes.
You don't change.
I gave you this long-winded explanation, and you managed to do it very succinctly. So bravo to you for doing that.
So it's funny. A couple of years back, I had gone to Freedom Fest. It was the first year that our radio network was covering Freedom Fest. And Larry Elder was in the elevator and some other folks. And I called myself an African-American woman. And he said to me, well, why are you using all those words? Words have a value. You wasting them. You're Black. So I learned less is more. So yes, get it condensed before people's eyes glaze over.
So we have a question from the audience. Does Shannon support giving the auxiliary club chairs a vote on the executive committee?
So in my experience here in this state, not to exclude any other groups, but in my own personal experience, the Women's Federation and the YRs put in a heck of a lot of work. And to put in that work without having a voice, I applaud you for doing it. That's the most diplomatic way I can answer that. But for me personally, when I'm putting in that much work, whether I have a voice or a vote or not, you're still going to hear me. But I applaud you all for continuing to do what you do without that, your vote being your voice. And I think that that's something we need to address.
So looking forward, we get to this next coming year, one of our real priorities is going to, we as Republicans, both as a first vice chair or county chair or secretary in my capacity, will be recruiting candidates for office. And sometimes that you have a surplus of people who want to run for office in an area that's more Republican, and sometimes you have areas that are, you're really just asking somebody to be willing to take it for the team. Tell me a little bit about your philosophy, because you did recruit, you helped recruit that team in Baltimore. How'd you go about it? And what was the way that you used, what were the techniques that you used to get people to run for office? Many of whom, who, let's face it, had no prospect of winning, but really performed a really valuable service by doing so, by running.
So you kind of get to know people, whether it's at a monthly meeting or events. And you know, you have conversation. You ask them, what do you think about this issue? What do you think about that issue? And then you work your way around to, would you ever consider putting your name on the ballot? But I will say this: we need to do more in terms of recruiting. A lot of times, we recruit folks to run in areas where we think are a long shot, and everybody around that person knows it's a long shot but them. So I think one of the things that we need to do to be able to benefit the party and that person is to be real clear up front. These are the odds. These are your chances. If this happens, this could happen. If this happens, this could happen. But these are some of the benchmarks that you need to accomplish and you need to reach for us to be able to come and meet you halfway here and be able to move this thing forward. I think there needs to be some honesty, less smoke and mirrors, and some reality in a lot of these races. It's going to take 2, 3, 4, 10, 12 times in some of these races to be able to really move the needle to where we are successful. But if we don't continue to do that, we will never be successful in those areas.
You put your finger on a really a kind of a tough challenge, because it's frequently you get candidates and they get into it, and it's fascinating. They're sometimes the most reluctant candidates at the very outset. Something happens and they just turn on, a light turns on, and they just throw everything into it, and they become very effective candidates. They get very, very strong at that, and that's obviously a positive thing. And
Right.
On the other hand, sometimes they're candidates who, as you said, there really was no realistic prospect that they were going to win, who become quite bitter about the fact that, gee, where was everybody? And you want to say, look, we really appreciate what you did, but there was only so much that could be done.
So I think honesty from the beginning, setting realistic expectations goes a long way. You got to let folks know. No, the state party, well, the Central Committee, the state party, and the RNC are not going to write in with big old open checkbooks because you put your name on a ballot. There are certain things that people are going to look for. One, do you understand the issue? Do you know the issues? Do you know the party's platform? Let's start there. If not, read this. Okay. From there, why are you running? What issues are your issues? What are your solutions for those issues? How much money do you plan to raise? How much money are you willing to put in? And how much voter contact are you looking and hours are you willing to dedicate and donate to be able to get there? And I think people need to understand realistically that they have to have some answers to those questions, because that then gives whomever it is they're going to the ability to make a fair decision on how much they want to put in along with that candidate, not instead of that candidate.
So is there anybody that you saw in this previous election cycle, obviously excluding yourself because you did run a very great campaign, but any other campaigns that you saw in Maryland this year that you admired the way that they did things, or something that really stood out to you as a really good thing that they did?
You know, I saw some campaigns where folks, from a political standpoint, spent too much time in the community, not campaigning the community, but working in the community. But you don't want to discourage that, because that working in the community and getting things to work better in the community is what this is supposed to be all about. So there are some folks that I saw around the state and in other states that really were in it to help people and focused on the helping people, as opposed to focusing on the process of trying to get elected to be able to help people for a longer period of time. And I think we really have to understand that there's a difference between what you want to do and what you have to do to try and get elected, and then what you want to accomplish once elected. And those are very different things.
It's sometimes a hard thing for new candidates or first-time candidates to get used to asking for the sale, asking for the vote, and they'll kind of dance around it and what have you. And quite frankly, sometimes they mislead themselves. Everybody's nice and chummy, and everybody seems to be getting along, and everybody's kind of happy, and yet they really haven't asked the question, Shannon, I'd like to have your support. Can I count on it? And that's something that I guess it takes time sometimes for people to feel comfortable. Although you talked about it before, it's selling. It's a skill that good salesmen know that they won't get the order if they're not willing to ask for it.
Absolutely, you have to ask for it. The Bible says you have not because you ask not. So I tell people all the time, especially in dealing with some of the churches in the city, so I'm gonna ask. I want your vote. I want your congregation's vote. I want to know what work are you willing to put in to actually change the community, as opposed to selling off your pulpit to whomever is willing to write a check to your church. Oops, did I say that out loud?
I'm sure that never happens, right?
Of course not.
We're coming up on the last few minutes of the show here, so I want to give you an opportunity to kind of open mic it. If there's anything else that you wanted to say or get out there, any message you wanted to share or thing that you wanted to plug.
Well, I'm just going to be straight and to the point. I want, for all of your folks that are watching right now, that are Central Committee members and have the ability to vote, I want your vote. A vote for me for first vice chair of the Maryland State GOP is a vote for tax savings in your pocket. It is a vote for helping to find, to recruit, train, and run candidates that will affect policy to make everybody's lives better. This campaign cycle cannot be about popularity. It can't be about all those superficial things. We got a lot of work to do. 2022 and 2024 are right around the corner. And if we want to be able to put ourselves in a position, and I'm going to say this one time, some people aren't going to like it. If we want to put ourselves in a position that with the next election cycle, we don't have to hear people talking about how many of you want to volunteer to go to other states because our state doesn't have a chance, we need to do something different. And this right here is your opportunity to do that.
All right. Well
said.
Yeah, Very well said. Shannon, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been really, really interesting to hear your perspective on not only on your race in Baltimore, but also your race for the upcoming state party elections. As somebody who, again, is on the outside and doesn't really have a vote, isn't on a central committee, it really is interesting to see all this playing out and to hear all the different perspectives.
I'm running for first vice chair. I'm not running against anyone. I'm running for something. And that something is to be able to improve and move our party forward, to improve the lives of each and every person that lives in this state, period.
I couldn't say it better myself, so I think that that's a perfect way to wrap the show, right, Mark?
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Shannon, for coming on the show.
All right,
Thank you.
All of you for watching. We will be back next week with, I believe, current State Chairman Dirk Hare, right? Yep, that will be airing next Wednesday at 7:30. And we will see you all